Dr. Susan McDaniel is Canada Research Chair, Tier 1, in Global Population and Life Course, the only of its kind in the University of Lethbridge. She is also a CLC in social science. I'm sorry, my eyes. in social sciences at the University of Lethbridge, Prentice Research Chair, and Professor of Sociology, University of Lethbridge, Canada. Dr. McDaniel is also the Director of the Prentice Institute for Global Population and Economy. She has been at the University of Lethbridge since 2009 and previously taught at the University of Alberta, Utah, and Waterloo. Her research interests are in demographic process and life course changes, family shift, generation relations, demographic aging and social policy, health and healthcare. She is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and recipient of many research and teaching awards. She holds the lifetime honorific title of Distinguished University Professor at the University of Alberta, where she taught for many years. She's the author of 9 books and research monographs, with 3 more books in press or development stages now. She's also author of 190 research articles and book chapters. She is a frequent keynote speaker at national and international conferences, as well as a policy advisor to government around the world. She presently has 5 concurrent research grants, the most recent of which is a 2.85 million Czech partnership grant on gender, migration, and work of care, on which she is co-investigator. She is principal investigator on the Czech synthesis grant on labor and skills. Next presenter will be Dr. Bonnie Malcolm. And Dr. Bonnie Malcolm is associate professor at the University of Alberta. She is involved in the Career and Technology Studies CTS area for the Department of Secondary Education in the University of Alberta. Her research interests include CTS program development, curriculum pedagogy, and teacher education, youth and adult school to work school transitions, dual credit, apprenticeship, and policy related to education, training and work. Dr. Bonnie is currently working on research projects that critically examines school to work transitions by means of secondary school apprenticeship. That also explores the industry side of high school apprenticeship by comparing factors influencing the effectiveness of programs, investigates the strength and weakness of different models of apprenticeship, assesses practices about CTS teacher recruitment, retention, and education, and studies and restructuring of the CTS program of studies, which informs the future design of CTS teacher education programs, and analyzes how the restructured CTS program of studies might advance young people's connections between high school, for example, off-campus education program, and other subject areas, post-secondary education, and paid work. Our third speaker, Heather McIntosh Rivera, holds a Bachelor of Management degree from the with distinction from the University of Lethbridge in 2008, and she is currently pursuing a multidisciplinary master's degree in economics and sociology at the University of Lethbridge. She has always been keenly interested in the economic impact of the movement of people and is currently researching the impact of second-generation immigrants in Canada. Heather is also the Director of Business Development and Operations at the Economic Development Lethbridge, and she maintains a close connectivity to the local business environment and, in particular, organizations which provide immigrant services and support. Heather was born in Canada, but moved with her family to Belize, where she was 8 years old, returning in 1999 back to Canada, pursue a career in Ontario, and later came west to pursue her degree. She and her 3 sons have been residing at Lethbridge since 2003, where they happily call it home. Thank you very much, and may I leave the floor for your ladies.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Glad you left some time for us to talk. Anyway, we're very pleased that everybody came out on a cold night. I don't know why everybody's lined up on that side, but it feels like the room is going to tip. So if you want to move or, you know, switch your chairs around, feel free. Make it informal. And keep eating and drinking while we talk. Let me just outline what the plan is. We're going to make it a panel, so I'm going to introduce the overall project and talk about the demographic aspect, which I focused on. And then we'll turn it to Bonnie, who will talk about skills development, skills issues. And then Heather is going to kind of pinch hit for the third co-investigator on this project, Lloyd Wong, who did the immigration part. And Heather agreed, she was a research assistant on the project, and agreed to present that part of it. Lloyd has a very good excuse for not being here. He's at the University of California at Berkeley doing research on his sabbatical from the University of Calgary. So it's probably a little bit warmer there. So anyway, we miss him, but we're glad that, that Heather can agree to be part of it, because she was part of the whole project. So let me just tell you about what I will talk about. What I want to talk about is the origins of the project, because it's unusual. The way we did this, it's not really research, it's more pulling together what's already known. So that has to be clear. And then some of the key findings from the part of the work that I did in this, that I led. And then we'll open it to the others and then to questions, because it's called Cafe Conversations, so we want to have a conversation. So that I hope will be good. And we have this new technology, so I don't know how this is going to work, but we'll try. Ah, it worked. Look at that. Amazing. There we all are. The title here is a little bit different than the title of our grant. The title of our grant was, let me just make sure I remember it, Is the Math Sufficient? Aging Workforce and the Future Labor Market in Canada. And we'll return to exactly what we're talking about there. Each of us in this project, Lloyd, Bonnie, and I, the leads on it, each of us engaged a research assistant at our respective institutions. So Heather, fortunate or not, worked with me. I was very fortunate. She worked very hard. And Miriam Secondi worked with Bonnie at the University of Alberta, and Stefan Lewis worked with Lloyd at the University of Calgary. So we want to be sure we give them credit, because they were very helpful, and we all worked together as a team. It would have been great to get everybody here, but it didn't quite work out. Well, let me just tell you that we did all meet together, including Miriam, who came in by conference call on the 1st of August, and Leanne Little, who sits back there, was arranged as an administrative assistant, arranged a wonderful meeting, a day-long meeting, where we kind of pulled our act together and figured out what we were going to do, how we were going to approach this task. So that was a very good opportunity to get together and really form a team. And we thank Leanne for organizing that, because it was quite splendid, actually, what she did. So moving to the project itself, let me just tell you how we got involved in this. Because it's, you know, what I thought of when I saw the hockey team being selected for the Olympics. That's how this project started. We were not a curling team like on most grants, where you set up your team and you stick together. This was a hockey team that was put together by somebody else. So the way it worked is that the vice president of research at the University of Lethbridge, Daniel Weeks, got it into his mind that we should apply for a grant at SSHRC under the Knowledge Synthesis Program. And the Knowledge Synthesis Program, let me just tell you, is not to do original research, but to synthesize, to pull together the best research that's known out there to answer a question. So he got it in his mind that we should do this. So he said what he would do is invite me to lead it. And I said, yeah, right, sure, I'm going to do this, because I already had at that point 3 grants. Now I have 5. So at that point, I thought, all at the same time. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to just do this, right? And then he said, then I thought I had an out, because he said that, this was before you got involved in it, but he said, I've contacted my counterparts at the University of Alberta and the University of Calgary. All 3 vice presidents of research have gotten together. I think this is a great idea. So what they're doing is asking for their best people at Calgary and the University of Alberta to join the project. They're going to essentially ask somebody to join it. So that's how we got, it's like a hockey team for the Olympics, you know, we got put together. So I thought in my infinite wisdom, this isn't gonna work. You know, we're thrown together, this isn't gonna work. We don't have nothing, we don't even know each other. So then we got together in a conference call, remember that?
I do.
And we all got along, we could talk together, it worked. And I said, oh darn, now I'm really into this thing. Yeah. So it was kind of amazing how it worked, because I've never done that before. I've always formed a research team on my own, like a curling group. And this, we were thrown together, but it worked, and we all liked each other, actually. And then we got the research assistants involved, and we liked them too, and it worked like a charm. So it was quite an amazing production. But it's a different kind of a thing than I had ever done before. And I couldn't get out of it at that point, because I liked these people. So then when I handed in the application, after the 3 of us wrote the application, I said to Nancy, I said, golly, I hope I don't get this thing, because I have too much to do. Remember that? Yeah. Of course we got it. So anyway, here we are. We're happy we have it. We're getting to the end of it, but it's been an experience. The perception, the title of our grant was this: is the math sufficient? I repeat it so I can talk to it. Is the math sufficient aging workforce in the future labor market in Canada? The perception exists out there that with aging population, a lot of people are going to retire, lower fertility, fewer people coming into the labor market, there's going to be labor shortages. That's the perception. And a lot of people say that. So the question becomes, to what extent is that true? That's what we're asking in this. Is the math of people exiting, people not coming in, is that the tail, or is it bigger than that? And what light can we shed on it? So that's where we started with that question. And our title question is, intended to address a perception out there. So that makes it of necessity controversial. But I emphasize here 2 things, and it's really important to keep these in mind. One is, we did not do the original research on here. We brought together the best research that's known out there, peer-reviewed articles and reports that already exist, and we simply assembled them and distilled them and put them together. So if you don't like the findings, that's not us. All we did was put it together. And some people don't like the findings, so I'm warning you. So the project objective, this works great, Nancy. Thanks for this little thing. It's great. You can walk around with it. It's not attached to anything. I like it. So the project essentially is an interdisciplinary team with 3 kinds of expertise. In demographic change, which is me, skills development, which is Bonnie, and immigration. And we're all known in our fields for these things. What we wanted to do was bring those 3 things together and looking at the existing peer-reviewed literature. And I'll tell you precisely how we looked at that literature in a moment. So the project objective is to ask what the best existing research tells us about Canada's future labor market. Will there be shortages of labor? Will there be shortages of skills? What's the role of immigration in all this? That's what we're asking. But we're addressing it to the literature, not to people who have views or anything like that. There was a cascade of questions that we originally put in our plan. So just 4 questions, but they relate. Is the math of declining working age population sufficient to predict labor shortages? Is it sufficient to predict skill shortages? How does that work? If shortages exist or are likely in the future, are they labor shortages? Are they skill shortages? What about mismatch between needs and supply of labor? Big issue. So we looked at all these things. What has been the role of immigration and of shifting immigration policies? Very important question. A lot of stuff bandied about that, but we don't really know what's going on. And then, what is the role of shifting skills development? What more can be done to align labor market needs with skills development, particularly of those groups that are currently jobless or under or unemployed? So, what we did was look at literature, and we only looked at peer-reviewed literature. So this is very important to keep in mind when you find the findings. We searched scholarly databases and relevant journals with keywords. Obviously, immigration, demographic aging, labor skill shortages. We had a list of keywords. We systematically defined those. And then we looked at peer-reviewed literature, because you can't cover the whole waterfront, between the period from 2000 to 2013. So we had it constrained to a particular point. The project ended at the end of 2013, so that's where we stopped. And it's only peer-reviewed reports and journal articles. So any government reports, opinion pieces in the papers, opinion pieces by bankers, whoever. We didn't look at any of that. We looked at peer-reviewed empirical research. So we're immediately caught in a contradiction, and I really like this. Because this is hard to read possibly, but I love how this works, because life often works like this in social sciences. The blue button is true, the red button is false. This is the kind of conundrum, and that's why we called it conundrum, that you get involved in with this kind of discussion. People say that if you see it one way, you're wrong, because that's false, but on the other hand, if you see it the other way, it's also wrong, because somehow there's other data to support that. So we keep going back and forth on this. And in this case, there's quite a bit of stuff supporting both sides of the argument. There's what is called, the federal government, for example, all the time talking about skill shortages, labor shortages, the Alberta government doing this. And I'm not saying that's totally wrong, but there's a lot more talk than there is evidence to support it. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And there can be still shortages in certain periods, in certain regions, in certain jurisdictions, without having skill shortages all across the country. So we're looking at all across the country. And then there are other examples of saying that there are problem skill shortages. Then there are people who say, no, that's wrong. We'll look at the empirical evidence and say there aren't skill shortages. So we have to face this contradiction, and it's rather fun actually to look at a contradiction. It makes it for a certain excitement. If everybody's on one side of the boat, like you guys are all sitting over there, it's boring. You've got to mix things up a bit. So what did we do? What did we find? Let me just try to summarize this as best I can, because I don't want to take a lot of time on my part of it. But essentially, what we found, based on the literature, peer-reviewed literature, a couple of things. There's no evidence across all of Canada. There's no evidence of widespread labor shortages nationally. It's just not there. In fact, the evidence, and this is the best predictions possible, say that the labor force is going to continue to grow in Canada until 2031, which is quite a long time from now, but at a slower rate. So this notion that the labor force is going to stop growing and there's going to be shortages is simply not supported by the evidence across the country. Maybe different in different jurisdictions. We also found, and this is very interesting, I think, that in terms of skills shortages, there's no national skills shortage. In fact, we have the highest educated population that Canada's ever seen in this period, in the early part of the 21st century. There are, however, some skills mismatches. So that means there are job vacancies and there are people who are looking for jobs and they don't quite match. And then furthermore, and Bonnie's going to talk a lot about this, so I won't take all her thunder. But furthermore, there are cyclical shortages, which means that, in a very simple term, because not everybody's a labor economist, although there are some here, we won't talk to them. That means that there are cycles in the economy where there are shortages, skill shortages appear, but they're not. It's a bouncing up and down thing. It's not a permanent decline in skills. It's a bouncing up and down phenomenon. There are regional shortages sometimes, always been the case, always in Canadian history. And there's sectoral shortages. So that means, quite simply, some sectors in the economy are growing, others are shrinking. And in Canada right now, we've got that big time. We've got some sectors growing rapidly, boom, boom, boom. Others are shrinking equally rapidly. So of course there are going to be some imbalances, but there's always been that. So that's what we have concluded. And Bonnie, of course, will talk more about the skills issue in a moment. Okay, what about the demographic dimension? This is the argument in the title. Is the math sufficient? And this is the part that Heather and I really focused on, even though she's going to put on the immigration hat tonight. But the argument is, remember, population aging, people are going to go out of the workforce, declining fertility, we're going to have fewer people coming in. Well, there are a couple of things that we found that are really important and shed light on that. The first one is that people say, and you do hear this a lot, baby boomers are all going to retire and they're going to be taking, their jobs with them. That's it. Baby boomers, you've got to understand this is extremely important. Baby boomers right now, a 20-year period. The oldest baby boomers are about 65, the youngest ones are 46. They're not leaving the labor force, even the oldest ones aren't. So this notion that baby boomers are going to pop out of the workforce all at once, they're going to go off to Florida or someplace. First of all, they can't afford it. Even if they were all the same age at the same time, they couldn't afford it. But what 46-year-old do you know, unless they win a lottery, is looking at retirement? They're busy at the prime productive ages. They're earning, they're raising kids, they're sometimes supporting their elders. These are people who are not exactly a drain on the system, they're the people that are supporting it. So the concept that the baby boomers are all going to pop out of the workforce and create a labor shortage is not so. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, older workers, if they're healthy, and if they like their work, or if they can't afford to retire, are staying in the workplace. This whole business of Freedom 55 is just somebody's dream. Not happening. Nobody's doing that, unless you're sick. And that means there's a real class dimension to this, because people who worked in hard labor all their lives, working in mining, working in construction, something like that, fall sick earlier, they retire earlier because of health problems. But other people are staying in the workforce longer. So they're not leaving even if they're 65, they're staying there. So that's very interesting. Then there's a gender dimension, and this is really neat. Because if you have more women in the workforce, many of those women started to work because of the generation thing, started to work a little later, they're not going to want to retire. And if they're married or matched up with somebody, they're not going to want him or her to retire either, because then you got to care for him at home, and you don't want that. So what's happening is women, because they want to work longer, they started later, are dragging their husbands and their partners to work later too, so they can all retire together. And that's a very important phenomenon in this staying and work later. And nobody had to incentivize these people in any way. They just said, heck, I'm going to stay. I worked hard to get this job. I'm going to stay here. And sure enough, partner says, yeah, I'm not going to retire if she's still working. I'm staying too. Makes sense, but we don't think about it. Third thing is very important. Fourth thing, sorry. If we had labor shortages now or looming, probably we wouldn't have as high an unemployment rate as we've got. And many of the people who are unemployed, not all, but many of them, I fall into two categories. One is disadvantaged groups, we consider disadvantaged. So what would that be? Aboriginal youth, people born in poverty, the disabled, lone parents. But we also have a heck of a lot of unemployment among educated youth. So if we have a labor shortage looming, how come those people aren't scooped up? It's a conundrum. It doesn't seem to match. So what we have concluded in this is that the notion of the math, people leaving the workforce, creating labor shortages, simply doesn't work for a variety of reasons, but those are the main ones. So what have we done with this so far? I thought I'd just mention this to you because it's creating quite an interest. And then we'll turn it to Bonnie to talk about skills, the skills part of this. in September last fall, we had a meeting in Ottawa. Bonnie and I were there with some policymakers and others to share preliminary findings, which was quite interesting. Then on November 7th, I ended up in the hot seat at the Conference Board of Canada. What was it called? The Conference Board of Canada Skills and Post-Secondary Education Summit, where I presented. And there were quite a number of people there who were quite interesting. One of the people that struck me as interesting, and I don't know names and I wouldn't cite them anyway, was a banker from a major bank. And he said one of the issues, and I think this is something that Bonnie will probably pick up in what she has to say. If not, I'll come back to it. One of the issues he said is, we find it difficult to pick a post-secondary person and invest in them. And because it costs a lot for us to train that person, and then they go to another career. So we're a little bit worried about that. And so somebody in the panel said, yeah, but in the past, companies did have generalists from universities come in, and then they were trained in the particulars of that corporation, which makes sense. Because how can we know what's going on at a bank? We need to know, we need to train people who are generalists who can do skills that banks require. So he said he's reluctant to train them because of this career shift thing. So what we concluded a little bit is we've got a little bit of a waltz going on here. That employers are reluctant to train, and then they say that universities should train the people for their specific trades, which universities were never designed to do. It doesn't work that way. Because we'll probably mistrain them for whatever occupation they go into. So if we train generalists and then the corporations pick up the ball and train them, everybody can benefit. But the hint is that employers are reluctant to do that, for good reason perhaps, but it changes the whole equation. Then on January 14th, I think I got the dates right. If I don't, I'm not good at dates. Bonnie and I had a conference call with several Alberta departments on this. And they weren't sure about the study because it's a national study, and they argue, of course, that there are shortages in Alberta and skills issues in Alberta. But it's very important, and we conveyed this to them, or we tried to, that you cannot take a national study and generalize to a specific province. New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Alberta, it's not going to work because they all have different sets of problems. But very often, policies are made at a federal level in the country. Jobs and issues that connect to jobs and mobility are made at the federal level. So we have to know about the federal level, and people do not stay put in one province. That's part of the issue. We have geographic mobility of skills, and that's important to know because people can migrate and do migrate into Alberta to fill some of those skills. So all that is important to know. Then next week, because life goes on, we're back in Ottawa, Bonnie and I, to do a policy workshop, a 2-day policy workshop with policy people on our study and all the other knowledge synthesis studies. So that's going to be on the 11th and 12th of February next week. So I just thought I'd mention that, and I will turn it over to Bonnie to talk about something that I don't know as much about as she does, skills.
I'm not sure about that, but thank you very much. I appreciate being here. Now, can you hear me back there, or should I project a little bit more?
A little more.
A little bit more? Okay. So you want me to put my teacher voice on is what you're asking me. Okay, teacher voice it is. Thank you very much. I appreciate being in Lethbridge. I think it's colder in Edmonton. There's a yes? Oh, yes, okay. Okay. Oh, we're not moved yet.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is there are 3 slides, and I'm going to talk about them in a more general way. These are the topics, sort of touching on lightly on each one of them. So essentially for this first slide that I'm going to speak to is really, what does the research tell us? And the research tells us that there are short-term shortages that can happen, and they're expected and normal. There are, when we looked at the data, remember we're looking at existing research, that there are shortages that happen many times, but they're usually of a duration less than a year over the last decade. Now there are structural shortages that happen as well, and these ones occur because of population changes, demographic adjustments, technology developments, industry growth, okay? And the current labor force may have significant skill sets, but sometimes those skill sets are not what the employers require. And as we all know, skill takes a little bit of time to gain as we work through our lives, our working lives. Now, the miscalculation of shortages can lead to some very erroneous policy, and we have to be very, very careful in how we approach this. And now, also going back a bit, these shortages can occur in various ways, basically geographically. And as an Albertan, and as we're all sitting in Alberta, we do know that there are pockets of skill shortages or labor shortages depending on the demands of the particular industry at any given time. Okay. Now, government and employers, and some might say employees, need to find better ways for the employed and unemployed Canadians to expand, connect, and apply their skills. Okay. Do I have the right one? Okay. Skill development. Canadians, and Susan touched on this, when we look at Canada as a whole, we have a very well-educated population. And in the developed countries, we have a significantly higher post-secondary graduation rate. Now, there are various motivations for this education. A lot of it rests with ourselves to be able to attain higher incomes, better prospects, to be able to move in various locations to do the jobs that we want to do. Okay. Now, going back in the notion of employer training, there are a variety of employers who do train, and the statistics show that 23% of Canadian employers do train, but this looks a little bit different in ways of it's not necessarily a structured program that employers are training. They may offer some transportation costs. They may offer a variety of transportation coverage and sponsored training outside of the training itself, not necessarily in-house. They may pay for some courses to be offered elsewhere. It's not nearly as structured as some other countries might be. Governments also contribute to skill development and acquisition. Employers often look at the return on investment for the money that they're spending on employee training. Now, when they look at that cost-benefit analysis, they may choose to put their money elsewhere because they can see a more immediate or more focused return than employer or employee training. And this is particularly true when employers get concerned about, and I have an industrial background, so I've been an employer and I totally understand all this, that the notion of if I train someone and that person goes to the employer that's sitting down the street, then basically my training dollars just walked out the door. However, the way I look at it, and always did in the back there, is somebody else trained somebody else who I might be hiring, so those training dollars walked into my shop as well. So there is a balance, and if we look at it in a more global perspective or a holistic perspective, we might be able to move that idea along a little bit further. Okay. Now, going back into the notion of employee training, hiring apprentices, and I don't know how familiar most people are in here with the apprenticeship system. Basically, there are 80% on-the-job training, and then there's about 20% in-class training, formal training. But hiring apprentices is one way to advance employee training. But there is a slight problem with this as well when you're working in this environment. When there's a lot of work, we have lots of apprentices, and they have the work. But sometimes the problem is the apprentices don't believe that they should be going to school because they have the job and they're making fairly good money and they want to advance their work and their training on the job. And the employers may not want them to go to work as well. And this is sort of maybe a common myth. I know a lot of employers invite their apprentices to go to school because they really want them to earn their journey certification. However, the problem is if you have an apprentice And if by chance the work is not there, what are you going to do? First of all, you don't have any work to further your hours for the apprenticeship. And the other part is you're going to have to find a job elsewhere, so you're not likely to finish your apprenticeship training. So there becomes a disconnect between how that works. And as we all know, there were a number of apprentices that the number of apprentices have increased over the last number of years. For example, there was a 120% increase from 1995 to 2007, and only 43% completed their journey certification in that time frame. So we're talking a period of 12 years where there was an increase of 120% apprenticeship registrations, 43% completed. Now, in that same time period, there was also the university, also and colleges. There was a 36% increase in enrollments in those institutions as well, and there was a 30% completion. So you can see the differences. They're quite dramatic between the two, or actually three educational systems. Okay. And this is youth and school to work transitions, which is one of my favorite areas to be working in, because I do believe that if we are thoughtful and we have good policy and programming in place, we can help our young people advance into careers that make sense for them. Okay. And also align with what we need in Canada. Okay, so there are many ways youth enter the workforce. They sometimes finish high school, they go into the workforce. They may be entering in high school, they may find a part-time job, they may find a dual credit situation, they may be working in such a way. I don't know if you're familiar with RAP, but Registered Apprenticeship Program is an ideal way for many people to learn about other occupations while earning high school credit at the same time. Now, the skill development in junior and senior high school, both in school and outside, generates tangible post-secondary and employment opportunities. So these connections with the workforce, if we can sort of introduce them throughout high school, but not so much because if the student works too much, then their high school suffers. So there's a real fine balance here. But the research tells us this is a really positive way to help youth enter the workforce. However, there's some startling statistics. In 2010, 15% of people aged 20 to 24 years and 8% of 15 to 19-year-olds were not in the labor force, they were not in high school or in a post-secondary or in any formal training. Those are terrible numbers to be working with. And from some of the studies, for example, the YIT study, the Youth in Transition study, Aboriginal youth are found to have a lower education achievement when exiting the education system than non-Aboriginals. And this is a group we have to really be conscious of and help. We really need to stop the early leavers from high school. They're at a strong disadvantage when they leave high school without a diploma and that connection to the workforce and the notion of what might be possible in the formal post-secondary education system. Okay. Evidence indicates that policies to reduce youth high school leaving without the diploma have high returns for disadvantaged youth. And we need to ensure that these youth have the means to access education and employment. However, there is a lack of consistency and visibility in transitional services to help youth stay in school and to navigate to the workforce and into post-secondary. We really need to do a better job of helping and introducing ideas to these youth and offer the notion of what can actually happen in high school and bring that further into their future lives. Now, vocational education and apprenticeship in all of this tend to be viewed as less than optimal education. There's a trend that everybody should be going to university. However, this would be changed a little bit if employers actually recognized the quality of vocational education in our high school system as well, and parents and society and the community. We need to work together to make that different. vocational education, it does provide a solid foundation from which students can launch. And if we had a different system of articulation between the post-secondaries, and so we could go through an apprenticeship system and then align directly maybe into another university 4-year bachelor degree, not necessarily education, but there's a plug there, right? We would help add value to these different occupations and these starting spots that make sense for kids and young people. Okay. We need to also have a better system in place for the second chance to get a high school diploma. Because right now this sort of seems to drop off the edge at age 19, and I'm talking specifically in Alberta right now, but this is, the research is telling us, if we have a better system of these second chance high school earning, we will do it'll be a better benefit for our young people to be able to then re-enter into a post-secondary and then quality employment opportunities past that. And the research does say that there is not yet any example of a program in Canada that has proven to be effective in meeting the employment needs of severely employment disadvantaged youth. And I'm just going to slowly finish here in the notion of, I have lots of words here to say, but I want to leave time also for a conversation because I believe that your questions are very important. So what we need to do is, in the anticipation of our economic growth and need for more workers and quality workers, there's an inclination to turn to immigration, as we have seen throughout our study. But Canadian youth currently in the K-12 education system are the greatest source of future labor, and we really need to consider best how we can help these individuals be an active part of the Canadian fabric, both in the employment and community. Okay, thank you.
Heather.
Thank you. Oh, look at that, it worked.
It works.
It works. Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? No one's saying no, so I guess that's a good thing. So as Susan mentioned, I'm standing in for Dr. Lloyd Wong and his research assistant, Stefan. And I'm going to give you some of the highlights of what their findings were on that portion of our research team. So in general, immigration policies have not been meeting the needs of Canada's labour market. Highly skilled immigrants are being severely underutilized in the Canadian workforce in their areas of expertise because their experience and their credentials are not being recognized. As a result, immigrants are not actually meeting those needs that we've identified within our Canadian labour market. So Canada's immigration irony is that we attract highly skilled workers from around the world, but then we underutilize or even completely fail to use the important skills that they're bringing to our workforce. The reviewed literature on immigration and labour in Canada falls into three sort of overarching themes: a call for the reform of the immigration point system, an appeal to broaden immigration policy, and the need to reform and/or improve foreign credential recognition in Canada. Within each of these thematic areas, researchers reflected on the challenges with Canada's immigration system, how it fails to connect immigrants with the labour market, and further, how it's not filling Canada's perceived labour and/or skill gaps. A core body of the reviewed research argues that immigration policy will increasingly be relied on to deal with things like short-term and long-term occupational shortages, an aging workforce, and a diminishing supply of highly skilled workers. For example, a 2013 Conference Board of Canada report suggested that Canada's economy is heavily influenced by demographic pressures, with the skills gap caused by an aging population. In this report, the author, Laura Dawson, further argues that if this gap is not filled, it could hamper Canada's prosperity and growth, diminish our competitiveness, and constrain our ability to take full advantage of global growth opportunities. According to a 2013 Statistics Canada study, it's estimated that one third of Canada's labour force will be immigrants within 2 decades. So the point illustrated by these literature examples is that immigration is central to Canada's future economic growth. Did it switch? Oh, here we go. Temporary foreign workers, another aspect of our immigration system, often referred to as TFWs, are generally thought to provide a short-term solution to perceived labor shortages in specific sectors. The expansion of the TFW program has stimulated debate in the research literature. The question most often raised is whether it's sensible to use temporary foreign workers to meet the needs of Canada's labor market, while the annual number of permanent immigrants to Canada has remained relatively constant over the last decade. The types of specific skills sought for temporary workers changes throughout the years, but they typically fill those low-skilled jobs that Canadians in general may be reluctant to take. An emerging research literature criticizes the temporary foreign worker program, finding that the program contributes to regional inconsistencies in unemployment and has hampered wage adjustments in Canada. Filling labor and or skills gaps with short-term temporary foreign labor has detrimental effects on the temporary workers themselves. They are at risk of exploitation, and they are affected by the isolation that comes from not integrating and being able to settle within their Canadian society, thinking and feeling temporary. Thank you.
Do we have another slide? Oh,
No?
do you want to do that one?
No.
No? Okay, I guess I'm stuck with the last slide here. That wasn't the plan, I didn't think, but.
Oh, I can do it if you want.
No, that's okay. I'll mention it. Just very quickly, when we think about needed next steps, the kind of things we came up with are the immense difficulty of projecting labor demand. It's hugely difficult, and nobody has really succeeded in doing that well. It's sort of like the concept of Gretzky is the only one who can skate to where the puck will be. The economy is so dynamic that it's hard to predict exactly what you're going to need in the future. So if a student even starts a training program, an apprenticeship program, the evidence that we have found in this knowledge synthesis project is that by the time they finish the apprenticeship or finish the degree, the economy has changed and they need to do something else. So the notion of having a direct pipeline where you can say, I'm going to prepare and this is exactly what I'm going to do, very seldom works out. Most of us who've lived for more than 20 years know how that works in life. But it's very difficult to predict. Second thing is the point that we raised earlier and that Bonnie elaborated on quite eloquently, and that's shifted employers' investments in training, which we don't know a lot about. We found very few studies of that. What works in school-to-work transitions, we really don't know. We have some idea of what works in other countries, particularly Germany, which has a very smooth school-to-work transition. Canada's is really quite haphazard, and we don't facilitate that work. We sort of put people out and say, go for it. And we don't provide them with the needed information to go for whatever they wish to do. Integrating underemployed into the workforce is a huge issue and an increasing challenge. What do we do about that? We say we have a skills or labor shortages, which we have not found to be the case, but then we have underemployed people who are not working up to their potential. So what do we do about that? How do we do that? That involves policy, employees, post-secondary, and employers. It's got to be a multi-part solution. The ratio of foreign workers to unemployed youth, this is an issue. Many people that I've spoken with about this, and what we see in the literature to some extent, is a little bit of literature that says temporary foreign workers are filling labor gaps, but they're not taking work away from Canadians. In some ways, that's not the case, because if they're working at Wendy's or McDonald's or some other place where they seem to predominate, particularly in Alberta, the temporary foreign workers, if a student wants to work flipping hamburgers or being a barista because they want an employer to say, you were a good employer, you come on time, you treat the customers right, even if they're earning minimum wage and working part-time, they can't get that because the temporary workers are taking those jobs. So this notion of the temporary workers not taking Canadian jobs may not be the case. They may be taking jobs away from Canadian youth that may aggravate the problem. Do temporary foreign workers suppress wages and opportunities for Canadians? We honestly do not know. We don't understand that. But Alberta has the highest number of temporary foreign workers of any province in Canada. So we could look at that in Alberta. Does the availability of temporary foreign workers affect job training? We don't know. Very little's been done on this. Do temporary foreign workers create regional unemployment disparities? Again, we don't know. How to overcome the challenges of foreign credentials and work experience. And this is something Heather, Lloyd and Stefan looked at in their segment of this, but Heather articulated very well that we have this immigration paradox, that we attract the best and the brightest and then we let them drive taxis. You know, we have not achieved that barrier, and we're deceiving the immigrants in policy, but we're also not taking advantage of their skills, which we desperately need. These are needed next steps. I won't go on from there because we want to converse with you. So that's the end of our formal presentation, and then our handsome moderator is going to take questions and figure out how to handle that. Oh, here's my machine.
Thank you very much for your presentation.